Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're officially in afternoon on the Pacific time, and I am so happy to welcome you today to Know Your Rights, Expanding Commercial Tenant Protections and Commercial Affordability. I am Bobby Boone, a member of the senior leadership team at the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network, and I am also the founder of And Access. And Access is a retail real estate and urban planning firm that is focused on historically excluded neighborhoods and entrepreneurs. When we really asked when they really asked me to start and figure out this session, one of the things I thought about for tenant protections is that it really starts with education. And so we drafted the Setting Up Shop guide at And Access in partnership with ICSC. You can go to the next slide. And this is really a guidebook that walks tenants through, like, all right, what's the process to get there? Avoiding some critical pitfalls of establishing a brick and mortar space, all the way through figuring out what are financing terms, etc. Today, one of the things I also want to introduce you all to is an initiative from And Access entitled In Place. Next slide. In Place is a new financial model that will create data and solutions to solve for commercial displacement in minority communities. We have, looking at the nation, we have solidified some partners on the next slide that really talks about, how this is an issue and a challenge for many communities across the nation. And so when we're thinking about creating new data, our goals are to, really think about, what is displacement risk? What are the investment solutions needed? We're developing a dashboard to do that, that will illustrate those things, as well as conducting a national survey. This survey is available online through our website. We hope that you check it out and share it with business owners within your network, because we're creating a one of a kind data set around many of these issues on a national scale for apples to apples comparisons. There have been a lot of work that's been done in silos, and not being able to support national organizations or even organizations on the ground in order to create those strategic interventions to thwart displacement. So while we're proceeding within this, next two slides actually, what I would like to do is just go ahead and introduce you to the format of this session. We will be conducting a few presentations here with some follow up by one-on-one interviews. So our esteemed panelists today are: one, John Chin, the Executive Director of Philadelphia Chinatown Corporation; two, Amy Nagy, the Development Manager at Prosper Portland; and finally, Jay Norris, the CEO and co-founder of Guesst. So, as we get started today, I want to first start off with John to really set the stage. Can you give a quick introduction of yourself, what the work you're doing at the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation, and how those things addresses the issues of expanding commercial tenant protections and ensuring commercial affordability?
Great. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. Happy to be here. Happy to be part of the conference. Um, yeah, I'm the executive director of the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation. We are a nonprofit 501c3. We're also a community development corporation, which means not only are we invested in the commercial corridor of Chinatown, but we also do affordable housing and serve low-income families so that we can ensure that they have financial sustainability. This first slide that you see here is our beautiful China Friendship Gate. This was brought over from China. It's the first authentic gate built in North America by artisans from China. We're pretty proud of this. This is part of the token gift from our sister city in China, Tianjin, and it was a gift to Philadelphia. Um, I was born and raised in Chinatown and lived here all my life. And this community is a special community. And if you frequented Chinatowns, you know that it's a cultural hub of a cultural celebration for Asian Americans. And it's also for people to experience Asian American culture, whether it's simply coming in to dine, but also to participate in the many cultural events that take place in Chinatown. Um, Next slide. So our organization is all about preservation. Philadelphia Chinatown was founded in 1870, and it's the last remaining ethnic neighborhood in the Philadelphia Center City area, um, and has been experiencing quite a bit of gentrification pressures. Now, gentrification, I'm not using as a negative term, but just the fact that a lot of rising real estate costs are impacting the commercial quarter and the small businesses. The fact is that Chinatown is a gateway for new immigrants and is an opportunity for mom and pop small business owners, entrepreneurs to gather up their savings and open up a business that they really want to invest in and provide a product or service that they think that can serve the greater Philadelphia community. Um, what we see in Chinatown is that once entrepreneurs are in place, it's really hard to find new retail space opportunities for new entrepreneurs. But some of the basic things that our Chinatown is experiencing is, and today, uh, a lot of the deficiencies that we see are the weaknesses in commercial quarters, especially those like Chinatown or BIPOC, is the cost of financing is expensive, which you've already seen or heard about in the conference, and the return on investment is low. What I mean by that is small mom and pop shops in Chinatown, they don't have a lot of capital. And what capital they do have, they invest it 100% in the business. And in order to make the pro formas work, it's really a family business. Other relatives come in and join in. So the return on investment is much lower in a neighborhood like Chinatown. Next slide. So this is, her name is Grace. She actually opened up one of the first coffee shops in Chinatown. That I would say she was the pioneer before Starbucks arrived in Philadelphia, Chinatown. She has, as you can see behind her, a whole full shelf full of coffee varieties from all over the world. And she had Ethiopian coffee and Mountain Blue Java coffee well before many other coffee shops. So she's been in Chinatown, I think, 30 years now. She's built a following early on. As you can see, she's a female-owned entrepreneur and also minority-owned business. And she's been very successful. But she also has had challenges, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Can we go to the next slide? Um, Chinatown is a fun destination to come to. Um, our community is always looking for ways to participate in celebrations and festivals. So the Chinatown Block Party was a idea that generated out of a partnership between Chinatown with the city of Philadelphia during the July 4th Independence Day celebrations. And you can see that the streets were closed off for performances and vendors set up shop on the streets. Next. Um, this is probably one of our most successful events that we've put on for Chinatown. It's called the Night Market. In Asia, if you've been traveled to Asia, you'll see that night markets are very popular. What they are is outdoor food events. So in Chinatown, we've averaged about 25,000 people descending upon our pretty small neighborhood. And this typically has taken place in October. It was suspended during the COVID pandemic period. But as you can see from the photo, people just love to come out for food in Chinatown. And also in the photo, you notice the diversity of visitors that come for this event. Next. Um, so what we're here to talk about is how do we preserve these special places that not only are special for the residents that live in Chinatown, but also for the visitors that come here. And lastly, also for the city of Philadelphia, because as much as Chinatown is a residential commercial district, it's also a tourist attraction for visitors and conventioneers. So, how can there be a united effort to ensure that commercial corridors that have a unique cultural identity like Chinatown can survive? And how do we protect those small businesses from gentrification and rising costs where they're actually displaced. So several of the solutions that we have looked at for Chinatown are business improvement districts, historic district designation, legacy business program, which has been talked about at this conference, zoning overlays, which is a planning approach to neighborhood preservation, and lastly, commercial land trusts. Um, and uh, we've looked at the business improvement district. This is a solution where the community itself or property owners contribute to the creation of a geographic district, and each property owner agrees to contribute a certain percentage of money towards a pot that stays in the district and is to be used in the district for a number of services, which may include helping small businesses with grants and subsidies to maintain their affordability for rent or other activities. Historic district, which many of you have heard about, this is a very restrictive solution, but it does preserve the cultural identity of a neighborhood. And the restrictions and the challenges are that anytime you want to make any kind of changes within this district, there's a whole approval process which can delay renovations and new businesses coming in. Legacy business program is about how do we keep those businesses who have been here for a long time? How do we keep them in the neighborhood? How can we keep the businesses going? And there's a number of financial solutions to help businesses maintain the passing on of businesses to future generations or new business entrepreneurs who may want to buy the business. Zoning overlays is a specialty of community development corporations. Uh, we have one in our Chinatown here in Philadelphia, and what it does is it restricts uh, through zoning law certain uses. It even can restrict the height of buildings, and it can restrict the density of buildings. And the reason this has worked for Chinatown, it actually discourages large developments from coming into the community, hoping to build large scale parking garages, hotels, or high density developments. And finally, commercial land trust, something that we are looking into. We haven't tried yet, but it's a very interesting solution, and that also has challenges. Next slide. So, I think some of these we are looking at intently and understand very well. A couple other solutions we don't know very well, but we're looking to them as well. And the future of Chinatown, we've been here since 1870, and the question is, which of these solutions or what combination are right for this community? Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John, for that presentation. I think, you gave a great understanding for the audience of various solutions that really could support with commercial tenant protections and preserving affordability. Of those solutions, which one do you think, is most effective? And then, how are you as an organization dedicating resources to that?
Well, I will tell you that the zoning overlays, again, is something that we implemented back in the late 80s,
Mhm.
when we knew that the Pennsylvania Convention Center was building a brand new convention center for the city of Philadelphia. And we also knew that along with that would be coming parking garages and new hotels. So in partnership with the city of Philadelphia, we came up with some zoning overlays. And the zoning overlay was very specific to the Chinatown commercial corridor. And it was very specific in preserving the look, feel, and identity of Chinatown here in Philadelphia. And because of our limited scope, we had buy-in from the City of Philadelphia Planning Commission. Um, but even with that solution, there are those property owners within the Chinatown district that were fighting the zoning overlay, because sometimes property owners, as we know, their goal really is to maximize revenue generation for the property. And that's where the challenge is. But we were successful in getting the zoning overlay passed. And I think for the most part has been very successful and has worked. And I suggest other districts sort of look at the planning aspect to see how that can help give disincentive to large developers.
Sounds good. Last question for you is, can you just talk through kind of the process? Like you mentioned, the property owners being a challenger, to its actual success, or sometimes an opponent. What was the process though that you all went through in order to approve that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that our agency has always been good at is outreach and engagement. And as sometimes exhausting as it may sound, um, early outreach and engagement buys trust, uh, regardless of what you're doing. And in this particular instance with the zoning overlay, I think, and part of this trust is the messaging.
Mhm.
The messaging is really important. And the messaging is about the preservation of Chinatown. So I think from using this trust building um, process, along with doing research and data that we shared with the people in the community, I think a majority of the community understood that the survival of Chinatown and just basic understanding of economics, that when you build a large convention center that holds tens of thousands of people, along with that will come the hotels and the parking garages, and they need to find land and property to buy and build on. So just very basic um, data research along with the trust really helped us to be successful. Now, the challenges that we had within our own community that actually prolonged the process. But at the end of the day, I think people made the wise choice and voted for the zoning overlay.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing this, very impactful solution, one that, we at End Access have definitely proposed for many of our clients. So thank you again for joining us today. We'll welcome you back a little bit later. But in the interim, I'd like to welcome to the stage Amy Nagy. Again, she's from Prosper Portland and have some exciting things to share with you about some of the programs that they're running. Amy, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Bobby. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for inviting me here. I'm super excited to be with you today. As Bobby noted, I'm going to be just sharing 3 strategies for how we're approaching affordable commercial tenanting for retailers in Portland that both attracts and perhaps more importantly retains small businesses, particularly owners that identify as BIPOC or immigrants. I have a lot to share with you. I've done my best to kind of roll it up in the highlights, but happy to continue to talk with folks beyond the conference, particularly because I think the details of these strategies is where we all really need to pay attention. So just a brief background, Prosper Portland is the City of Portland's economic development agency. Our mission is to create economic growth and opportunity for all Portlanders. Portland has been known for our preference and our commitment to shop local and support small businesses. But for all of the love of small businesses, retailers still struggle to enter into the market for a variety of reasons, but it's even more challenging for businesses of color. And so when we think about really kind of the real estate aspect of this, I mean, I know there's a lot more behind all this, but just for the focus of today's conversation, thinking about the real estate, it's been an industry, right, that is filled with jargon, relationships. You need money to access it and to be a part of it. And so outside of pop-up programs, which, just about 5 years ago were pretty limited, Prosper Portland started to look at where are there opportunities that we could either offer space ourselves or partner with the private sector to provide real high quality, affordable space that's also attractive to local up and coming brands that to lease and have an opportunity to be seen, to sell their products and start to build wealth. So these strategies all have kind of come in various forms of really, and if you could advance the slide, sorry about that. The pandemic that was really kind of hampered our momentum, but I think that we are picking up steam again, which is really exciting. So next slide, please. So for our first strategy, it's centered around the commercial space that Prosper Portland controls. Within our spaces, we're trying to reduce those barriers of entry and offer kind of a variety of tools to do that. So starting with the space build out, which is really can be time consuming, it's costly, it's a confusing process, even for people that are, paid to do it. And so we provide what we call a warm shell, which means that a retail space has their floors in, the walls are up, but they're drywalled and primed, ready for paint. The electrical is all wired. There's heating and air conditioning all within the space. And so it's really kind of a plug and play for the new business. We provide a tenant improvement allowance, which basically comes in the form of a grant that provides extra cash to the tenants to customize their space that reflects the feel of their brand and the experience that they want their customers to have when coming into the shop. And then we also have pretty generous lease terms. So that includes everything from looking at lease rates that are below market. We have opportunities for folks to actually exit and get out of the lease without penalty in the first 2 years. And then we actually work with tenants, and these are some real live tenants that are their images here on the screen. We work with them on a case-by-case basis, right? Partnering with them, trying to make sure that they have what they need in order to be successful. And so at this particular property, which is in downtown Portland, I'm really proud to say that we haven't lost one tenant during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So this second strategy is one that we use to partner with the private sector to offer affordable commercial space. And so in this instance, we partner with a building owner and enter into an agreement called a consent to let, which identifies major terms and conditions for leasing to small businesses. And so it includes, the type of tenant that they could be leasing to, the level of experience that the business may need to have, maximum lease rates, including a rent schedule. And then in exchange, Prosper Portland provides a tenant improvement allowance to build out that space. And so this has actually worked amazingly well in one of our neighborhoods known as Lentz in Southeast Portland. And so we're looking for opportunities to scale that as well. And then the third strategy, next slide, please, is what we call our affordable commercial space program. And this sits within the city's zoning code. So it's for a developer who's either building new or redeveloping a site and wants to have more square footage in their development than what's allowed under code. So they can get additional what's called floor area ratio, also known as FAR, and a height bonus in exchange for creating affordable commercial space. And they can do that in 3 ways. So they can actually provide that space on site. If they don't want to provide on site, they can contribute that equivalent in dollars into a fund that Prosper Portland controls that we can use to then invest in and further the goals of the initiative, or they can do a combination of the two. If they decide to go ahead and provide it on site, then there are requirements around the space delivery and the lease terms that reflect how we actually manage our spaces that I was showing in strategy number 1 that they need to abide by and provide that space for for 10 years. Next slide, please. And then just briefly, the kind of the additional details beyond real estate, I think are really important. I understand there's been quite a bit covered around technical assistance, so I'll save my notes on that. But other ways in which we've been working with businesses is really also around marketing. Absolutely, spreading the word that they're in their new location, and then working with them about how can they also be engaging their customers, right? Like small businesses cannot actually be just offering sales to attract customers like national brands. And so we talk with them about how they're connecting through their story, the rotation of their offerings that's in their shop. Most tenants actually have been using their spaces for gatherings to host community conversations, events. I mean, it's become so much more than just a transaction, right? You're not just buying the t-shirt any longer. And then activations have become paramount for us, particularly during the pandemic. So in space, outside of space, we invite other small businesses to come. It's a great opportunity for them to test if they want to actually be a retailer, which, I mean, for those of you that have worked in retail or are currently doing it, it's a lot, right? And so really understanding if that's the path they want to go to versus being an online shop, popping up at seasonal markets, etc. It also brings folks together in just a beautiful way where they're meeting, they're networking, and most typically actually end up partnering in some way. So as I mentioned, these are all just kind of have mostly been strategies of kind of pilots to date because the pandemic real bummer, has, really dampened that, but we're excited to get that going again. We do have some additional funding actually through the American Rescue Plan Act. So we're looking at tightening some of these approaches and then hopefully scaling them. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Amy, for that presentation. I know there was lots of content that was plugged into a really short time. I really love, part that you landed on is around, those business owners truly engaging their customers. And I think that's, part of why we're here today is just really recognizing the value that these businesses have for their, cultural identities, their neighborhood cultures, et cetera. And, being able to be a living representation of that. To kick us off in the questions, I wanted to really talk about, the last point you made about scaling, where are you headed? One, so in terms of what the scale mean, and then two, to be successful, what type of experience or expertise is really needed, whether that's on your team in partnership, et cetera.
Sure. I appreciate the question. So we, as I have noted a couple of times, have been putting these in the context of a pilot. And I think government is really well positioned to take a lot of these risks, right? We have funds to invest, we have space to offer, to actually work through what are the kinks that are needed or that we can identify and need to smooth out, both for working with small businesses who are wanting to take space, as well as working with property owners who might be in a position to be leasing to these businesses. So I think we've done a really nice job about that. In order to scale, though, we do need private property owners. Like government, I don't think we want government owning all buildings. I don't think we want us controlling downtowns, anything like that. And so it's kind of like, how do we take this and give the tools both to those business owners and those property owners to begin to work together and implement it at other sites? In terms of what people need, I think in addition to willing property owners, there is absolutely a need for some of the technical assistance and the small business supports. Part of, when you've got a business, some folks that are makers want to then immediately sell their product. And thinking about, are you a maker that has a product to be sold elsewhere, or are you a true retailer? Those are some real conversations, right? And thinking about also what it means to be in a space, anything, and we're going to hear about this in just with our next presentation, but thinking about point of sale, inventory management, all of those components aren't necessarily pieces that businesses have always thought about, and they want to jump into space. And so those are really important, I think, to think through and be really honest and plan for.
Yeah, that's really a keen. I think largely many, don't really understand, going from, developing a product to running a brick and mortar space, and having the opportunity, one, to test those things is essential, but two, supports like Prosper Portland is very helpful. As you were talking about, really collaborating with property owners and landlords to collaborate, what are the key challenges you see with that partnership? What have you experienced already? What do you foresee in terms of the scaling moving forward?
I think there's a couple of considerations. One, most notably, is just a level of cultural competency, right? We're working with communities of color, and I can speak with myself working with tenants directly. Folks get put under an umbrella of everybody's, a person of color, when you're really showing up, right, with your own kind of experience being, depending on how you identify as race, your own cultural group, whatever that may be. And so taking the time, honestly, to just slow down and really connect and build the relationship with those business owners has been critical. Like building that trust, right, where you're going slow, and kind of what we heard about just previously, like going slow in order to go fast has been really critical to our success. And it's never done, right? It's a relationship. You're like moving in with these tenants. And so making sure that that is a kind of a consistent flow of communication, transparency, all of those things are just really important. When you start to scale that, you lose control of that, right? So property owners and landlords, they can show up with their best face on, but when you actually, when they move along to start that own relationship, how do you maintain sort of the integrity of what was initially planned? And what do you do in which to problem solve when things arise? And so that's going to be something that I think we're going to be keenly aware of. But I think we've got a very strong network of community-based organizations that focus on particular communities that I think are going to be really important, so that they can help sort of run some of the interference and be a support when that's needed.
Yeah, that's great. Earlier today we heard from Naya from Portland.
Yeah.
The work that they're doing, and the amazing TIF, like structuring that they're trying to pull off. Fingers crossed. But with that, I think because Portland has this reputation around prioritizing small businesses, and prioritizing what that means, and for whom it often comes to mind. Whether that's diverse groups of business owners, whether they're different age groups. Can you talk a little bit more about how that's accomplished through your programs, and specifically what you maybe even envision moving forward?
So I think we've, kind of harkening back to taking the time to talk with owners and really understanding at what point are people starting from, right? Where is their level of acumen around leasing space? How long have they been in business for, right? Like what stage are they in? So starting to really understand where they're at and making sure you're meeting them where they're at and then connecting them with the resources that they need in order to do that scale. I think who you market to, how you talk through terms, all of that starts to show about who you actually are wanting to lease the space to. Right. So you could quickly go into a very mainstream jargon that works for broader national brands, but that you lose people. Right. And when you start to lose people on a local level around that, you lose the trust because it becomes confusing and it's like you're hiding something. And so I think it's being really intentional through the whole process, which for many of us just means, again, slowing down, thinking it all through of what's their experience and centering their experience of what they're hearing and building that trust is really important.
That's great. Well, Amy, thank you so much for this. I mean, I think that's such a great segue as we enter into this next conversation around, what are the actual tools to, start to explore what terms could look like, and how you can deploy that at a community level. So with that, I'll bid you adieu for now, and then welcome Jay Norris, the CEO and founder of Guesst, to the stage. And Jay, I'll let you take it away from here.
Hi, how you doing, Bobby? And everyone else out there, how are you? John and Amy, that was excellent. I will segue right into it. So my name is Jay Norris. I'm the CEO and founder of the Guesst software platform. People always ask me, they say, well, what made you come up with this Guesst platform and why? And I always say, because my background was a commercial real estate broker, retail and office leasing was my specialty. But I found in my retail tenants that I represented wanted to do more of these things called pop-ups. All right. And as I started hearing more and more of that, I said, wow, this is really interesting, because getting back to some of the things that Amy just left off on, which were, wow, you have to understand where these tenants are in their journey, right? We call it a business stage gate process. And so one of the things I thought of was, I said, wow, what if there was a software that essentially could allow a tenant to take baby steps in a way, right? Incubator labs to test a site or a neighborhood or a center first. And I said, well, that's interesting. They could do that. However, you'll need software to be able to track it. And so welcome to Guesst. Guesst is a third-party verification platform that allows a property owner and a tenant to actually track the sales performance of that tenant at a specific space or area. Okay, so next slide. Can you get to the next slide? There we go. All right, so we call this creative leasing opens doors. And so what we mean by creative leasing, we mean that in order, getting back to some of the points that were made earlier, which is trust and transparency, in order for a property owner to actually allow a tenant that may be taking baby steps and testing the waters, they're going to need to make sure that this tenant actually is performing. So creative leasing is a performance platform. So we believe that if you can be creative, instead of it being a fixed deal, which is traditionally a fixed 5 and 10-year lease, is what most property owners are looking for. I said, let's create a platform where we can create a variable lease, where it would maybe 10% of your sales generated essentially would be paid to the property owner. So our software allows for us to track that sales that occurs and shares it with the property owner so that they can provide what we call an amicable deal with the tenant. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here we go. So this is one of the reasons why we created this, is because getting back to some of the points that were made earlier, between property owners and tenants has always been kind of a tumultuous relationship, right? And so we recognize that sales per square foot is how majority of all private property owners and public REITs that we work with work. They want to know sales per square foot and what's happening or generated in their neighborhood or in their centers. And so in a lot of the centers, they have sales report. They have sales reporting that has to occur every 30 days, every quarter, or annually, right? So the tenant is audited on these. But it's done in old ways. It's done through you write it on a sheet of paper and you'd hand it to a property owner, say, this is what I made last year, or last month. And that's how it's done. Our platform actually plugs into the tenant's POS system and provides daily automated sales performance to the to the property owner in real time. So, and one of the reasons we do this is so the property owner can now say, you know what, this is what's happening in real time. It can happen two ways. If they provide accurate sales reporting, the tenant could say, look, this is what's going on here between 5 and 7 o'clock. All right. I don't have as many sales. Maybe I could send some of my employees home. And that way the tenant can save money from that perspective, as well as they may be doing events in a certain area or a pop-up market or at a mall. Okay. And that's kind of why this sales data and analytics provides that trust and transparency, because it kind of allows the property owner and the tenant to work more like strategic partners on hopefully the mutual goal, which is success. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so one of the benefits and it has to be mutual benefits, right? So the property owners love our platform because they can see exactly what categories are performing, right? And so they can help. It helps them with their merchandising plan. If it's John, say it's like Chinatown's development or Amy's Portland development, you can see exactly what your product mix is, and in real time what's performing over others during certain hours, which allows you to be a little more proactive in trying to find the right tenants to fill certain space. And that's from the property owner's perspective. And on the other side, the tenants, it allows them flexibility. They can now go in and say, you know what, property owner used to charge me $10,000, $20,000 a month. And I understand that during holiday season, but you know what happens after holiday? Sales trends and consumer spending dips off January, February, March. Can you lower my base? And I'll give you a percentage of my sales. And so a property owner would look and say, wow, this is interesting, but it's not to say I don't trust you, but really I don't. And so we allow for that trust and transparency to occur through our platform so that you can create these complex or creative leasing structures that work to your business, right? Because a lot of business is seasonal. Okay, next slide. And so we've created something called the guest list. One of our major partners is a group called Shopify, and they and a lot of businesses out there, know who they are. They're online, predominantly digitally native brands in their portfolio, and they came to us and said, "We're looking for a way to take our online businesses that are looking for physical retail to connect with your platform because you offer creative lease." And so, getting back to never knowing exactly where some of these businesses are in their stage, they said, we're going to find brands that make 1 million a year, 100,000 a year, 50 million a year. And we're going to see which one of them want to try physical retail. They're going to find the guest list. They'll go here, they'll search, they'll see multiple properties that have already been vetted by us to offer a creative lease. And so we like to look at the guest list as like an Airbnb for pop-up retail. But also I like to look at it and say it's an incubator lab. It's a way for brands to test, right, without having too much exposure or too much liability from a rent perspective. Because the three major ways that I've seen businesses go out is those three major costs for them are the rent costs, the labor, and inventory. And so I said, if we can help on the rent and make that a variable cost, this may be able to help a lot of businesses survive. And so that's it for the Guesst platform. Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jay. And I think you're one of few that have been able to start to bridge these gaps. And I really want you to spend a few minutes talking about, from a community organization standpoint. Many attendees are like community development corporations like John, who either are managing properties or have developers within their neighborhoods and developing. How could they leverage this, and what will be the outcomes you can see as it relates?
Well, I'm so interesting, John and Amy. I loved your presentations because I could immediately see how we can work together to help, especially a lot of the property owners. Because you mentioned, John and Amy, that that trust factor, right? And they, it's not that they have notes and things they have to pay as well. So we understand they have expenses. So I could see us working together very similar to what we're doing with the guest list. We're working with a lot of other public ventures here in New York. We could work with you the same way, as far as you'd be able to connect with your property owners and say, listen, I think we have a program that we can launch that may bring in brands into this program. And we'll use the Guesst platform to kind of track the sales and see who's performing and what categories. As well, the main thing is what I heard Amy say, which was track where they are in their progress. Where are they in their stage gate process? How can we help them along the way with all other resources they may need? But if we don't understand what they can do and where they are as far as their performance, it's very hard to even provide any tools, so you need to know it. So that's one way.
Yeah, that's really keen. I think yesterday with community ownership, we were talking about getting various community ownership models to scale, and having data that really can support this, et cetera. I think is really on target. So as we close out, I'd like you to just talk a little bit about a success story, and then we're going to welcome our other panelists back to stage for a more robust conversation. But give us a success story.
I'll give you one. I shared it with you before, Bobby. It's a girl named Monet Duke. And she came from one of those online brands that found the guest list, found a space, was looking in 5 or 6 markets, found a spot in LA. Some people may know it, the Beverly Center. She found the Beverly Center, and she's always wanted to be in the Beverly Center. She was like, there's no way I could ever get in there. And we struck a nice deal with Tallman, which is one of our customers, to test out certain brands through this program with Shopify. And she found it, and she found a space. They helped her with I loved also the warm shell. We like to call it a ready to wear space, right? I heard you say that, Amy. I love the warm shell. And she tested it for 3 months, and now she signed a 2-year lease.
Mhm.
Right? All because the property owner cultivated this trust, because the minute she started selling goods, the property owner could see the sales. So they knew after 3 months what the average number would be as far as what her sales and how she could perform there. And then they landed on a 2-year deal after that. That was amicable to both parties, or that would work for her, for the tenant, because they wanted her there because she brought, she was a sister who brought some real game to the table. They really appreciated her and what she was bringing, because she brought more vibrance and experience to the center, and a new market, they said.
Yeah. What's our business?
It's called Urbanly Chic.
All right, Urbanly Chic. All right, y'all go
Urbanly
check
Chic.
it out, LA folks.
Yep.
So at this point, let's welcome Jay, John, and Amy to the stage. We have a series of questions from the audience that we'll be getting to. But to kick us off, I want to say, we talked about some, these various solutions, many innovative ones. What additional solutions have you been dreaming of? How can we really say, all right, this is what's next? How does it, really serve the goal of further expanding tenant protections and affordability?
Mm-hmm. You guys, me or
anyone, whoever is up first?
I took up for the speaker, so I was gonna let Amy.
It's a good question. I think, part of it, being able to continue to build these out, like there's a there with each one of these strategies, but really putting them into place where we could see where they could be most successful in which markets, I think is really exciting. Retail is tough. I want to be really clear. Like, there's a reason why developers, lots of times retail is considered a loss leader. And so I'm curious about, particularly as Portland's office market is really challenged, what does affordable space look like for office folks, right? If we expand kind of the sectors and the industries that we're looking at, what does office do for us as well? So the ground floor experience is critical, particularly in Portland with our small blocks. Like, we love that feeling, but there's going to be a lot of empty square footage already, and then even growing. So I think there's more opportunity there as well.
John, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I lost connection for a second. Can you repeat the question, Bobby?
Yeah, no worries. We're in this digital age. And so, we're really looking at, what are additional solutions? I know you talked a little bit about community land trust, et cetera, but, are there any other, solutions that you think would really complement what's in place already?
Yeah, I think there's two. One is the legacy business program. I think there's something to that, because from the standpoint of a district full of businesses that understand, like a place like Chinatown, like its special attraction is that it's a cultural hub, right? And we want to protect that and keep it going. I think there needs to be people are willing to come together to find a solution, to come up with a pot of money that helps small businesses and property owners figure out the right match where that business can continue on. And, for instance, in Chinatown here, we have a grocery store that's been around 60 some years. It passed on from one generation to the next, but how's it going to pass on to the third generation? We all know that entrepreneurship, the second generation is harder already to survive, but the third is almost impossible. So I think the legacy business program is one. And then the land trust, I think, is a viable solution. But again, land trust requires a lot of capital, right? So is there patient capital out there from Wall Street or from other sources or from federal government or local government, where there's a long-term investment where the capital doesn't disappear, but it's used to generate long-term returns for the property owners. This way, they're not shortchanged from future appreciation, right? But at the same time, we can lock in an acquisition cost for these real estate properties, where we can work out solutions like Amy has, where you create this affordability for tenants.
Thanks.
You have anything to add there, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, as far as new solutions, I mean, I feel as though, data, like I said, getting the right data and analytics is going to be key and beneficial for everyone to move forward. We also believe that, stakeholders, property owners, the lenders, the tenants, the brokerage community, all need the right data, right, to make better qualified decisions moving forward. And one of the things that you guys all know, we all know, the SMBs, they need the financial resources. And one of the things we're working out now is a program where not just the property owner are seeing sales, but we actually have banks that will be able to lend merchant cash advance business to these businesses that need it. And so we're thinking out of the box on how to create almost like crowdsourcing the banks to give preferred rates to the lenders. I mean, to the merchants rather, because that's, I mean, we have to, we're going to have to create something that the interest rates have been going up. And my thing is, most merchants have to go in and ask for loans.
Mm-hmm.
And the loan is what it is. It's 10%. If you don't pay it, that's it. And I say to myself, well, why don't we create a platform where we're now going to have, instead of us going to the banks, we're going to have the banks coming to us and bidding on the interest rate that we want to pay. That's the goal.
Yeah, I think that flexible lending gets back to, some of the goals have been in place that I mentioned previously, but, really thinking about, what are the solutions needed? And then, back to this data question, there's one in there for you, Amy, like how do you establish below market rates? What's the metric that you use for that information?
So we've been doing, and it's really dependent on where it is in the city. And so we use anything from kind of crowdsourcing on the brokerage side, what people are seeing. We do CoStar. And so we do a combination of that, and then usually do it about 20% below. But then the goal, at least with the spaces that we're leasing, is to eventually get them up to market, right? Because subsidy forever isn't going to be successful, particularly if anybody needed to expand, they needed to move. It's not a guarantee that they're going to continually enjoy a fair amount of subsidy. It's more of getting folks started, getting ramped up, and giving them that time that they need and the flexibility to work that out. So to Jay's point, we offer loans. We do lending also for tenant improvements and working capital, and have really flexible terms. So if you can't make that payment, let's adjust it. We're not just going to call the loan, right, and trash your credit and do all those kind of more traditional type of things that we've seen in the market. So it's, I think, continuing to kind of build those tools around it for sure.
Nice.
I will say one thing too, what we're finding though, because retail is hard, and to make it possible for private sector, I think having a balance though of tenants when possible, that those that can pay market rate and those that are going to be paying maybe a little bit less, helps balance and helps. I mean, they do, landlords do need to cover their costs. And so that is an ongoing challenge, and something that we're always if you don't have some sort of mixed use to offset that retail, then you need to be able to find that somewhere.
Agreed. Yeah, those blended returns in terms of revenue generation is definitely a great strategy that I, see used across the nation. I have a question for you, John. As we're diving into the property owner perspective again, you're talking a little bit about the overlay zones and really understanding, within these districts and the property owners' opposition, for controlling the development potential. How did you overcome that? What were strategies that the organization kind of leveraged in order to push that effort a little bit further?
Besides fighting the opposition? No, so I think being the messaging. One thing nonprofits and communities of color, where there's very limited resources, whether it's votes to get political attention or capital to get finance attention, is the fact that if you're able to use communications and messaging really well, and framing the goal and the mission of whatever we're trying to do, that's how we overcame the opposition. Because the messaging was really about the zoning overlay and the special district zoning was a tool that we can use to preserve Chinatown for the long term. It's really, zoning overlay was for the greater good of the community, and not just for a few individuals, which would be property owners. But at the same time, property owners in the long term would benefit as well. Because one thing I think some property owners didn't understand is that their bread and butter is the immigrants, mom and pop entrepreneur, right? Because Chinatown is this centralized ethnic community. And to maintain that ethnicity and attraction, you need to bring in small mom and pop immigrant business owners. And they're not going to come in if rents are unaffordable.
That's really keen. I think, as we move forward, kind of, from, understanding it from the property owner's perspective, as a property owner yourself, Amy, within Prosper Portland being property owner, not you, but thinking about, what was can you share just how Prosper Portland financed the acquisition of your controlled space? It highlighted.
Absolutely. We do it a couple of different ways. So in the first kind of strategy that I showed you with the kind of the variety of different business owners, that is actually a partnership that we struck with our Bureau of Transportation. So those commercial spaces are actually sitting below a parking garage, and it's a centrally based parking garage. Our Transportation Bureau was like, retail is not what we do. We do parking, we do streets management, we build things. And so it was a great partnership that we did in terms of a master lease. And the really important piece of that is we pay very little on the master lease. And so our costs around ownership are pretty small. I will say again, the pandemic and some of the challenges that downtown Portland has brought on additional costs that we didn't anticipate, like security and window replacement and things like that. So that's been an unforeseen challenge, but that's one way. So we're looking at partnering with other bureaus that control space that don't necessarily want to be responsible for the commercial ground floor. So Housing Bureau is another great one. And then we are technically an urban renewal agency. So we use tax increment financing, and that's across key geographies. So like you heard today around Coley, we use that tax increment financing, which allows us also to buy land and construct space. So we've got some in kind of outer East Portland, Lentz and Gateway, where we actually built those buildings and control them, and have a mixed use with housing above. So it's kind of a variety of ways, and that's been part of the testing. It's like what works best, right? We also have one actually finally in Northeast Portland where we partnered with a private developer and have a master lease with them. So we've done master leases, private partners, public partners, and then own and construct our own space.
Well, thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes left, actually. And so with that, I want to do some closing remarks from each of you, 1 or 2 sentences that's solely around, how can we think about commercial affordability as resilience? And, any inspiring words that you have for us moving forward. I'll go in reverse order this time. Sorry to put you on the spot, Jay. You get to go first.
No. Wow, resilience. I think it's, when you think about the serial entrepreneurship and the mom and pops that we're talking about, resilience is something that, for them to start that business, if they're in it, it goes deep, right? And so I think that we've got to do something that, Amy mentioned earlier. We got to get, if we want to help them, like I call myself a small business hero, right? I love getting close to them. And I feel as though we're going to have to help them with understanding where they are in their journey, but utilizing certain software and tools to help them be better equipped. to succeed and sustain themselves in retail. And so I think it has to be done. They need it.
Cool. Thank you, Jay. Amy.
Well, I don't know how much inspiring this is, but I'm also just thinking about sort of the ability to support businesses and their ability to adapt, right? So keeping them in space is critical. I mean, that was a huge conversation that we had with landlords and property owners over the past 2 to 3 years. Yes, they cannot comply with the terms of their lease, but it is actually more expensive and at your detriment if you were to actually make them leave for not being in compliance with the lease versus if you work with them and keep them in space. So that's kind of on that property owner side. On the business side, it's thinking about how are you more than just the product that you're selling, right? What are you doing on like your web presence and your marketing? At the same time, when we have these kind of activations, these outdoor markets, how do you start to use the square footage in front of your retail space as an expansion of beyond your business? So when people don't want to go inside or something like that, it's another opportunity to engage and still just stay present and kind of in front and center of people's minds. And then again, obviously any opportunities to be innovative around partnerships. I think so an ability just to kind of read where the tea leaves are at the moment and be able to adjust to that is going to be really important for small businesses to be able to be successful.
Thank you so much. And John?
Yeah, I'll just say, I'm inspired by just listening to Amy's programs and how simple they are. I'm also inspired by Jay because he's trying to create and change the leverage, right? Getting banks to bid on loan business, that's pretty amazing, right? Because the banks pretty much control every aspect of a loan. So our motto here is in development for our community is development by the people for the people. And this is the same thing for commercial corridors, is that the small businesses need to have a voice and a platform to project what their needs are and how they can be successful, rather than industry telling them how to run their business.
I love it. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I would like to say thank you to Jay, John, Amy, for your great remarks. Thanks for joining me on the stage today. We have another sound bath that's to follow, followed by the next session, which is Organize and Multiply. They'll start at 4:45. Thank you all for giving me a little bit extra time in order to talk with these great panelists. So thank you and good afternoon.
All right, John and Amy, it was awesome meeting you.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much.